our moon compatibility in our charts. So we often hear, particularly in the Western tropical system, that our sun signs are compatible or not compatible with other sun signs. People will say, oh, I'm a Pisces sun and I'm compatible with Cancer and Scorpio and maybe the earth signs. And that they tend to, maybe date people based on this reality. Now, if we think about the signs in terms of how broken down they are, how close to us they are, our sun sign is really indicative of an entire month, right? And of course, we could get into splitting hairs over the tropical zodiac versus the sidereal zodiac and where your sun actually is, but that's a different topic. The quality of the sun is that it is our leadership, it is our authority, it is our connection to consciousness, so our connection to source, whatever that looks like for you, and how you are able to lead the rest of your being through that. It's the karaka, the indicator of the father. It's the indicator of career. And these things are not really super related to relationships. Not that they don't show up in some way or that sun sign compatibility isn't in some way helpful in relationship, but it's really not crucial or the most fundamental part of relationship astrology. Now we move into the moon and the rising sign, and we have a much closer to ourselves vision, because while the sun is going to change in this more like a month period of time, the moon is going to change every 2.5 days, right? The moon sign. So that's right away. It's like cutting down how close it is to you and how many other people share that with you, right? How many people share that moon sign with you. And of course, there'll be people born in other months that have your moon sign, which is what we see show up in charts. And then the rising sign is based on the hour. So like every 2 hours, the rising sign changes. So that's really what we call ourselves when we say you are this person. And if you saw my other video of you in love, we talk about the different rising signs that have some challenges in relationships. If you haven't seen that yet, you should check it out. And that really shows who the person is the rising sign. And the 7th house is the house opposite of their rising sign. And that's their relationships with others. But the moon is a whole different part of this. And the reason it's such an important fundamental part in relationship matching is because it's our intimate self. So while the rising sign is like the external you going out into the world and doing things and being somebody and having a personality and having an appearance and a body, the moon is like that part of us that is our mind, it's our psyche. It is our emotional state, and it's how we connect on this most intimate of levels. So when we're in relationship, you might be attracted to somebody's form or their personality, and that's probably what maybe, drew you to them to begin with, or had you even notice that they existed. And you might be attracted to their authority and their connection to source and those kind of qualities, particularly when we're talking about a man, that can really be a big part of who they are and what compels a woman to want to be with them. But it's still not that intimate, vulnerable part of ourselves that's relating when we're sitting next to one another or cuddling with each other or having long, deep, serious conversations, and the part of us that needs to feel good in relationship. The moon is really where we connect with people in that way. So I will do a video where I go through each of the moon signs. So each of the signs that your moon can be in, each of the astrology signs. But this particular video, I want to focus on how the moon can connect with other people that you meet. And it's one of the most important things, not just in romantic relationship. If you've ever met somebody and you're like, oh my goodness, like this person, I just can't stand being around them. There can be many different points in the chart, but sometimes it's that they have something really intense, like a malefic planet on your moon. So maybe they have their Mars on your moon, or maybe they have, a conjunction of 2 malefic planets right on your moon, or their Saturn on your moon, and you feel this pressure and this intensity from them. And then there's other people you meet and you just want to be around them. You just enjoy being in their presence. And again, there's many different ways this can show up in a chart, but the moon is particularly important for specifically romantic relationships, and we'll often see that is a point of connection for people in their charts. So I'm going to start by sharing my screen. I'm screen sharing. So this is the moon with each of the different other grahas. Graha means to grab. So this is the word we use for planets, but it's not necessarily a planet, right? The moon is a luminary, the sun is a luminary, Venus is a planet. The rising sign is not a body at all. It's a calculated place where the sun was rising on the eastern horizon, or excuse me, the star that was rising on the eastern horizon when you were born, or the sign, if we're talking about the whole constellation. Jupiter, Mercury, Saturn, Mars, all planets, and then the nodes, Rahu and Ketu. These are, again, mathematical calculations. They're the nodes of the moon, the eclipse points. So we just came through an eclipse period, and those were places in the sky where when the sun and moon line up in those places in a full moon or in a new moon in the same place, there's going to be an eclipse, and it has to do with the relationship with the earth, right? So we have the moon with the moon, meaning that two people's moons are in the same place. And when I'm done going through this, I'm going to just do a quick look at somebody famous and their relationships with several different people that they've been with. And we're going to see how this plays out. And this is particularly the one that came out the most in this little experiment I did. Moon on moon. This feels really good, right? The inner self of you and your partner is the same. You have the same kind of inner experience. Your, way of feeling good and the, way in which you share yourself in a vulnerable way, an intimate way, is going to be the same. Your inner experience is very similar. So this is going to feel really good. Moon on sun is going to be a different story. The sun is very bright, right? It's this bright orb. If you looked at someone's chart and they had their moon on their sun, it would be a new moon. And new moons feel more like the mind, our emotions, are being eclipsed in a way by the sun. Like they're being burned up by the sun. And for this reason, a new moon is a more meditative state. We're less engaged in our mind and we're more drawn back into our meditative state. Now, if we don't have a meditative state, meaning we don't really have any spiritual practices, this might actually feel a little bit depressing. So when a moon and a sun are together in someone's compatibility chart, we see that the person who has the sun is taking dominance over the moon, just like in a new moon, where you literally can't see the moon, right? It's like we just can go with the visual experience of like, wow, I'm looking up and I don't even see the moon. And if the moon is indicative of your mind and emotions, you're not seeing it as much. So the sun is dominating over the moon when it's together. And in Vedic relationship matching astrology, there's a lot of what we call polarity. There's a lot of things that work in one direction when we're talking about a male-female relationship, and they don't work in the other direction. Now, if we're talking about a homosexual relationship, or we're talking about people who are more gender fluid, or perhaps, not fluid, but a different gender than they were born into, these rules still apply. They just apply in a different way. So somebody is always sort of taking on the masculine energy and somebody's always taking on the feminine energy. It's rare that two people are completely ambiguous in that. Now, of course, there is that does exist. And I would venture to say that there's maybe more of a trading off of the energies with people. And in that case, there would have to be a different set of rules applying for this sort of thing. But if we're talking about people who feel within themselves that they want to be female or male in a relationship, and they're taking on one of those poles, one of those roles, then it's going to feel really amazingly good for the male pole to be having the sun on the female pole's moon. It's going to be like this sort of looking up to the sun, like, wow, you're my king. And the moon is feeling safe and held, and like this masculine energy is going to take care of whatever needs to be taken care of in the external world for her to just emote and just feel. Now, if you reverse that, and the person who's holding the more masculine pole, and the person is the one who has the moon, where the person who's holding the more feminine pole has the sun, there's going to be a reversal of that. And whatever you want to relate to in a relationship, whatever gender you're relating to in a relationship, you're going to want to feel that way in a relationship more than anything. Perhaps you go to work, let's say that you are a woman and you have this really amazing job, right? You're like president of a company, right? The most sun-like thing you can be. Let's say you're president of the United States, you have that sun energy very strong. Well, maybe at your job, that's what you want to be. You want to be the leader. You want to be the king or, the queen. You want to be the person in charge. But when you're in your romantic relationship, you aren't going to feel as good in that role. It's not going to help you feel like a woman. For a man, it's going to be the opposite. He's going to want to feel like a man, and he's going to want to feel like that. Maybe he has a very sensitive job. Maybe his job is one where there's more of a nurturing quality and more of a caretaking quality. And, or perhaps he's in a underling position at his work, and other people are in authority over him, and he likes to be told what to do at work. The argument would be that in the bedroom, or even in just the home, not necessarily just in a sexual sense, that he wouldn't feel as good in that role, and that what would make him feel more satisfied and happy in his romantic loving relationship would be to be the leader in that. So the moon sun, amazing compatibility when the man holds the sun on the woman's moon. When it's reverse, it's very counterproductive for the two people feeling their best in relationship. Moon Venus connection. This is a really solid connection. No matter who has the Venus and no matter who has the moon, this is going to feel good. And the reason is because both of these are the two planets that have the most to do with love. Venus is the indicator of love. It's the planet of love. It's the planet of our happiness, our pleasure, our capacity to relate, our capacity to compromise and harmonize, and what makes us happy, what gives us pleasure, what makes us feel good. So having somebody's moon on someone else's Venus is going to mean that the inner being, the inner self of that person is going to be exactly what makes the person happy. The other person feel happy and feel happiness. Now, if it is the woman's moon on the man's Venus, then the Venus is said to be like how a man envisions a woman to be. For a man, his Venus is what his ideal woman is. So his ideal woman is actually who this person is. It's not her rising sign, which is also a very strong connection, but that's again her external self. So that would be him, sort of the ideal woman being this external person that she is. This is who she really is. Her internal self, her intimate self is exactly what he finds most attractive. Now, if the Venus is the woman's Venus, then it's how she feels in relationship, how she feels about her own femininity, how she feels about the way that she is in this world as a woman. And it would be connected to the man's moon. So it would feel very held, very met, and very connected there. And so this would feel very good in that instance as well. Moon on rising, well, we've already talked about the fact that the rising sign is the external self. So the external self is feeling very good with the internal self, right? The internal way that one person is being met with the external way the other person is. And that person's external personality and the way they move through the world is going to feel very safe and good to the person's moon. And the person whose rising sign it is going to feel very good because who they are as a person out in the world going out is being met by the internal self of this, it being reflected back to them by the intimate, internal, emotional nature of the person they're in relationship with. So this is another one that goes both ways. Either Doesn't matter if it's the man, doesn't matter if it's the woman who has the moon or the rising, it's going to feel really good. So the next one, and I kind of did these in order of like most powerful connection, right? Moon, like most powerful connection. When we do the second video on this, where I go into the Vedic matching system where we use Kuta points and we take the nakshatras, the 27 stars, and we match them with other stars, there's something called Kuta points. And these Kuta points bring up various ways in which we relate to the other person. And when we see moon compatibility in this particular thing, we'll see that the moons that are the most compatible, the nakshatras that are the most compatible, are more often than not in the same sign. It's not always true, but every nakshatra has another nakshatra that they're most compatible with, except for one. And that other nakshatra is more often than not in the same sign. And yeah, so we'll get into that in another video, but you can really see that. And then moon sun, like I said, is one of the most powerful connections there is. If the sun is the man's and the moon is the woman's. Moon Venus, another, like, that's just super compatible. When you see someone's moon and Venus together, it's like these things, these compatibilities are almost enough in what we call the synastry of relationship compatibility. The synastry is where the planets hit each other in the charts. This is different from matching, like, are two moons compatible with each other? Are two suns compatible with each other? Are two Venuses compatible with each other? This is like where they overlay, if you were to put the two charts on top of each other, where they hit. So this is a different kind of thing with that. But in the synastry, these are the most powerful things you can find: moon sun, moon Venus, and moon rising. Now, moon Jupiter is more similar to the moon sun thing, where there's high compatibility when the Jupiter is the man's Jupiter. And there's less compatibility when it's the other way around. And in this case, it's because, just like they say a man will marry his Venus, pardon me, a woman will marry her Jupiter. She doesn't marry her sun necessarily. She marries her Jupiter. Well, Jupiter is the planet of beliefs and ideals and somebody's dharma in this world, their righteousness, their capacity to operate in society in a way that is right and just and ethical, and takes their beliefs and ideals and actually, acts upon them or lives by that moral code. And it can be compatible to have a woman's Jupiter on a moon. It's not quite the same level of depolarization as we see with the sun-moon reversed. So a woman's Jupiter on a man's moon is not incompatible. But it is better when you see the man's Jupiter on the woman's moon, because you see that she's looking up to him in that way. She's feeling within her own self, within her feelings, her moon, his leadership in the sense of his beliefs, his vision, his ideals, and how he's going to move through this world from an ethical and moral place. And his expansiveness and generosity and, really character in many ways, and his spiritual guidance, which is going to be really important for a man and how he shows up in the world. Moon Mercury. This is another one like moon rising or moon Venus, where it can go either way. This is going to feel really good. Having a person's style of communication where your moon is feels good. Your most intimate self is being connected to through their words. Of all the planets, Venus and Mercury are the most relational, meaning that they have the most to do with our relationships. When we're in relationship, we're talking, we're communicating, and we're loving, right? We're connecting in a romantic way, in a loving way, in an affectionate way, and in a beautiful way, in a way where we're trying to enhance the happiness and beauty and pleasure in each other's lives. And so having that connection to the moon is it's just going to feel good. It's going to feel like, wow, this person gets me. Their words literally say what my heart feels. And that's going to feel great. Either direction. Moon, Saturn. So now we're getting into the malefic planets that don't feel as good. And like I said, the sun can be that if it's the woman's sun on the man's moon. The sun is actually a malefic planet. Malefic means doesn't feel good. It can be translated as like bad, but that really shows a lack of understanding of what's going on with these planets. None of them are bad. The planets are pure energies. They're all good. But some of them give us more pressure. The sun gives us a lot of heat. The pressure comes through shining a bright light, showing truth. Glaring, hot, bright light is intense. It doesn't feel good all the time. Saturn is cold, dispassionate, fearful, and pressure. It's a lot of pressure. Saturn is the planet of time. So it's the pressure of time. You don't have enough time. You're going to die one day. Have you done this yet? And that kind of worry-wart energy that we can have. So someone's Saturn on your moon or your own Saturn on your own moon can feel kind of intense. It can feel like a lot of pressure. It can feel like anxiety. It can feel like fear. It can feel like depression, because Saturn can really be showing us the cold, dispassionate world that just doesn't care. And we're just going to die anyway, and a sort of nihilistic view on life. So Saturn moon can be an intense one. Now, the reason I put Saturn above Mars, Rahu, and Ketu is because Saturn is also the planet of commitment, what we choose to do with our time. And it's also the planet of humility, where we roll up our sleeves and do the thing with our time that we've committed to. And where we're willing to lower ourselves in honor of or in service to something that is more important than our ego. Like a relationship, like another person. Saturn has Digbala, directional strength, in the 7th house of relationships. And he's exalted in Libra, the sign of relationships, the natural 7th house. So we see that Saturn's very important to relationships. Commitment, very important to relationships. Humility, very important to relationships. The pressure or willingness to even make that commitment and even take that humble vow, even do the hard work necessary to humble ourselves, because anyone who's ever been in a relationship knows that it's not easy. Even with somebody where it's relatively easy, there's going to be hard times. Life is going to be hard, and you're going to have to be willing to do the work through that. So Saturn on moon brings commitment. And it brings a willingness to do hard work and a humility, but it also brings pressure and fear and anxiety and like kind of depression, but it can be a bit of a downer. So it does not feel as good as these other ones, but yet can keep us with somebody, can do that part of love that is necessary called commitment. Moon, Mars. This is one of the most challenging ones I find. I think the two hardest are actually Moon, Mars, and Moon, Ketu, and I probably would have reversed them around, except for I just wanted to keep the nodes together. Moon, Mars is very tough. The reason is because Mars is where we are individuating, we're strengthening ourselves by doing something by ourselves. Like I'm going to exercise my body so I'm strong, and I'm going to do that so that I can fight, outside forces or inside forces. And it's very important to have a strong Mars to be in relationship. Like people have really weak Mars have a very hard time in relationship because they're not disciplined. They're not courageous. They're not able to keep their own side of the street clean. And so they're always getting leaky into other people, blaming others for the lack of discipline and having a lot of fight and argument kind of thing. So I would argue that if Mars was in good dignity, meaning good intelligence, meaning it was in a sign where it was operating well, this would work better. But the moon is just such a sensitive, vulnerable part of ourselves that having somebody's Mars, their sense of fight, right on your sense of vulnerability, your most vulnerable place, your most sensitive place, is going to be very hard. And over time, that's not going to feel great. And there are people who have that in their chart, right? Their own Mars is on their moon, and they tend towards being agitated. They tend towards being all of these things people have in their chart, right? People, you can't have your moon on your moon because your moon is your moon, but all the other ones people have in their chart. And they feel, with the moon sun being the one that I would say often can feel kind of depressing for people, that sometimes, that can feel really good in a relationship if the man's sun is on the woman's moon. All the rest of these, this feels really good to have your Venus on your moon, usually to have your rising sign on your moon. Now, it depends on what it rules, what houses it rules, what energy it's actually bringing into your chart. The quality of the planet, like, is it in good dignity? Is it in high intelligence in the sign that it's in? All of these things are going to matter. But overall, moon Venus, moon rising, moon Jupiter, moon Mercury is going to feel pretty good, because the same reason it feels good in relationship. Like, my way of communicating is aligned with my inner self. That's going to be able to be vulnerable with one's communication. Moon Venus, the way that I feel happy and pleasure is going to be connected to my inner self. Moon rising, this is somebody whose inner and outer self is copacetic. They're not like fighting themselves. Like some people have, a fire sign for their moon and like an air sign on the outside or something, and there's just a lot of confusion for them. So it's these feel good within ourselves too. And moon Saturn, guess what, doesn't feel great. You're committed to yourself, you're committed to your fear and anxiety and pressure, and it's hard. Moon Mars doesn't feel good. You're always fighting with yourself. You're agitated, you're always in a state of agitation. It's hard to feel peace. The moon wants to feel peace. It's a lot easier to feel peace with Jupiter moon. A lot easier to feel peace when your beliefs and your ideals are calming your mind down and calming your emotions down. It's a lot harder when the moon Mars is riling them up. So moon Mars, that's a difficult one. Moon Rahu. I said this one could arguably be before Mars. And the reason for that is because Rahu's obsession. So when somebody's Rahu is on somebody's moon, it shows that they are obsessed with that person's emotional state. Well, this is for better or worse, right? This could be a very strong attraction. This can definitely be something where the person's like, certainly Rahu on someone's rising sign is like, that's the person I need to be with, and it can be very similar with the Rahu on the moon. Like, this is the, it's like this exaggerated, delusional view of how amazing this person is, or how much you need that person, how much you need to devour that. Rahu's literally a head with a mouth, just taking in and not assimilating anything. So it's just like more of that, more of your emotional state. But you can imagine for the person whose moon it is, it doesn't always feel good to have somebody sort of obsessively eating their emotions and being so fixated on them. It can feel a little unnerving. And it can even feel like that when it's somebody's Rahu on your rising signs. Like, okay, I get it, I'm great. But that part of you that's not in the delusion with them is feeling how it's a little bit delusional, feeling how magnified it is and how unstable it is. Rahu is very vata, it's very airy, it's very dispersive, and it's very, there's a chaos with the nodes. And again, a delusion. They are the shadow graha, the chaya graha. They are not of this world. And so there can be this quality of like, I know what you're thinking before you're even thinking it, or I know more about what you're thinking than you even do. And that's not true. Even if it is, not too many people want to feel that. So this is one where you can get that kind of obsessive feeling, that love bombing, that feeling where it feels so good. Oh my God, this is amazing. And it doesn't deliver in the long run. I would say that this one really depends on a few things. The primary one being if there's any other planets involved in the situation. Right? If there's other planets involved, that's going to change it quite a bit, because the nodes take on the energy of other planets. And then also what else is going on in the chart. If this is all there is just this obsession, it's probably going to not be great. But if there's a lot of other things that really hold the couple solid together and really show how there's something more there, then this is like an attraction point to keep the person coming back and to kind of rectify fights and things like that. by having there be such a strong attraction. So that's a real wild card, as the nodes are. The nodes are wild cards. Moon K2 is less of a wild card because K2 is the headless node. It is the node of the neck down to the tail with no head, nothing to engage in the world, disinterest, disgust even. So you can imagine how it feels to have someone's point of disgust and disinterest on your moon. It doesn't feel great. It feels kind of like, this person doesn't like me. They don't like who I am. And in a way, you're right. They don't really like who you are. They have a deep understanding of it, a lot of wisdom and past life energy there. And they feel like I've been there and I've done that and I'm over that. And now there's something else over there. And it's literally the opposite of where your moon is, that they're obsessed. So, there could be things like maybe your rising sign is where their Rahu is. And so maybe they, feel obsessed with who you are on the outside and disinterested in who you are on the inside. Or maybe there's something else going on in the charts that rectify this. Similar to Rahu, there can be, maybe it's a Venus K2 moon. And so the Venus moon part feels really good and the K2 part feels like less good or something like that. But regardless, this is not going to be the most enchanting of alignments. So we have that there. And I'm just going to do a quick look at the actress, Jennifer Aniston. And this just kind of came to me to use this person and her partners and just see, and this is, and several of these guys do not have very solid birth times. So this is one thing about relationship astrology is that the time of birth, which creates the rising sign, is it's very important in the sense of the rising signs, but it becomes less important than doing a natal chart in the sense of synastry, because the only thing is the rising sign may or may not be right. Now, if the moon is teetering towards the edge degrees of a sign, then that's different. Then the moon could actually be in a different sign, and then that can change it. And when we get to the Kuta points, and we talk about nakshatras, it can also, the nakshatras change, every 13 degrees. This is also going to be a problem where it could be the wrong nakshatra. So the timing is important and I don't want to discount it, but for the purposes of this particular experiment, I was able to find that the guys who did have kind of loose times where we weren't sure, their moon was sort of solidly in a sign. Although this particular person, that's not totally true. But for the other guys, that was true. So I will start with Jennifer Aniston herself and just show that her moon here is at 2950 and she has a double A score, meaning her time is verified. So she is at the tippy end there. It's not, she's at the very end of Jaistha in Scorpio. And you can see she's got her own Mars on her moon, but the degrees are very far. Degrees matter a lot. And they matter a lot in synastry. So they matter a lot in that chart. I'm like, okay, she's got Mars on her moon, which is disruptive. I just talked about that. And probably a big reason why she has had to have all these different partners when she's such a superstar and known for being sort of girl next door beauty. But those degrees are far enough where you can imagine that the level of agitation is a lot less than it would be if it was right on top of it. And this would be the same thing if it was a man's chart on top of her chart. The agitation would be less. But look at this fascinating thing that comes up where we see John Mayer, and I think he's one that didn't have a good time. His was like unverified or something, but still 526 it was given. You can see if I had put noon, then there was no time. So there was a time, it just wasn't very verified. But moon, Jaistha, the same nakshatra as hers and the same sign as hers. So that thing that I said that was really compatible. Vince Vaughn, same star, same nakshatra, same sign. Justin Theroux, this is a recent person. I am not too up on recent things, but his moon, I think this is like her ex. This is somebody she just broke up with or something like this is what I read. Is on her Venus. His moon is on her Venus. So his inner self feels very connected to her beauty and femininity. Now you can also see there's Saturn and Rahu involved. So we talked about those and how that's going to make him feel. And I believe they broke up. So we can see that her Rahu might make her feel obsessed with his emotions, and her Saturn might be a bit of a downer, but also brought commitment. And those things are also going to be issues with her, right? Just Venus on Rahu alone shows why she's like known for her beauty so much, this exaggeration of how pretty she is and how much she's like the, vision of what a man might want to be with, right? Not just beauty in general, like her, nemesis Angelina Jolie, who's just this seductress, but Jennifer Aniston's like the girl next door, like the girl people want to be with, like actually date, not just sort of like this beautiful woman who's on a pedestal that no one can ever be with. This is the girl you can get, right? Which is a very different thing. And Venus Rahu, and this is an exalted Venus, I should say. Her Venus is exalted, and she does have challenge in relationships. So we can see that the Rahu is probably creating some disturbance there. And then the Saturn also, right, bringing some downer energy, some practical fear and depression, but also maybe some commitment and humility and things like that. So she had that with Justin Theroux. And Vince Vaughn, again, has the same thing as John Mayer, where it's the same one. And then we have Daniel McDonald. And this is the one who got away. This is her guy who got away. He actually died. So, maybe he wasn't the one who got away, but he was somebody that she felt like she had a really healthy relationship with, a really positive, healthy relationship with. And his moon is where her rising sign is. So we see that connection of the rising and the moon. And again, he didn't have a good time. I think I had to put noon for him. Yeah, I had to put noon for him. There was no time for him. And that is sketchy because it's at 3 degrees, 24 seconds. So I can't guarantee that that's true, but rising sign on the moon is pretty solid. That's a pretty that's a pretty feel good experience, the inner and outer selves being together. And then we see Brad Pitt over here, who is perhaps the most famous of all of her partners. And he didn't also have a solid time. He was an A rating. Double A is like the highest rating where there's a birth certificate involved. And this one said from memory. So I don't like to commit to particularly the rising sign when somebody doesn't have an accurate time. And then the moon, you can see, is at 29 degrees here, almost out of Sagittarius. So that's also a little bit sketchy. Like I was saying, that when the moon is solidly in a sign, usually if the time of birth is not right, then the moon will still be, at least in the same sign, if not the same star. This one's a little bit more sketchy because of the fact that it's not a solid time. And it's a little bit hard to believe that somebody as famous as Brad Pitt has, essentially no Raja Yogas in their chart. Raja Yogas are when structural houses and dharmic houses come together and they produce results. And often famous people have several of them. So personally, I could see his rising sign being Sagittarius with all of these planets on the front house, which would show, a lot more energy there. And certainly many of them would be Raja Yogas, or even in Capricorn, where he would have the ruling planet in the first, which would be very prominent, and Venus, which is the 5th and 10th Yoga Karaka planet for Capricorn people, which shows creativity and career right on the front end too. So both of those rising signs in many ways, make more sense just off the, without doing any kind of rectification, but just knowing who he is. It's hard to believe that it's all in the second house of value, just because there's not as many results that would occur here. But let's say this is right, then again, we have this rising sign on the moon thing. We have Jennifer Aniston's moon here in Jaista, and then we have Brad Pitt's rising sign there. So that would be that same thing that we've seen, we've seen the moon on moon, and we've seen the rising on moon the other way around. And now we would be seeing her moon with his rising. But also, if this time were to change, we can see this moon inching closer to his own Venus. But she has her Mercury there at 7 degrees. So if his moon did inch into Capricorn, there would be that Mercury moon connection, which we also talked about. So there's, several possibilities there, but one of them is rising on Moon, which we've seen again and again. And the other is maybe Moon on Mercury. So in all these situations, we saw the Moon connected to either the rising sign or the other moon or the Venus. And that's powerful. Those are powerful connecting points. That's not even looking at any of the other synastry. That's not comparing the actual moons, although several of those guys actually had the same moon signs, for which I said in the Kuta point system is very strong. But that's just looking at just what hits the moon. And all these people, oh, that's not what I'm trying to do. And all these different men that she's had in her life, at least the ones who I could find some semblance of a time on, and that we may have heard of, each have one of those very strong indicators of connection: rising sign, Venus, and Moon on Moon. So I hope this is helpful and in some way enlightening for you on your path of knowing yourself and knowing what your patterns are in relationships. If you haven't already downloaded the Love Digits app, you can do that at www.lovedigits.com. And you can look up yourself and you can look up a partner. And even beyond looking at the compatibility score that they come up with, you can look and see where your moons are and what other things hit. And you can look at ex-partners, you can look at, co-workers, you can look at friends, you can look at anybody in your life and just see how you relate to them from your innermost self and how that's different from relating with, say, the sun sign. Maybe there's somebody that you share the same sun sign with, and then your moons are really inimical, and you might feel that in some way. You might feel how there's that their Mars on your moon or something like that. So it's a fun experiment to look at, and I hope this was helpful. We'll see you next time. Namaste. Aloha, namaste. This is Radha Home, and I'm here to